You don't have a focus problem, you have a consumption problem. And the difference between these two things is the difference between someone who changes their life and someone who spends their entire life getting ready to. I know because I was the second person for years. I read everything: business, science, philosophy, psychology. I knew more about human potential than almost anyone in my circle. I ran every morning, hit my targets, got faster every week. And every time someone praised my knowledge in a conversation, every time they said, "Wow, how do you know all this?" I felt it. That feeling, the feeling that I was different, that I was building towards something. I wasn't. I was consuming instead of executing. I was getting the reward, the praise, the identity, the feeling of progress without doing the thing that actually produces it. And my life stayed exactly the same. For years, here's the uncomfortable truth about focus that nobody in this space has the honesty to say. Most people who say they can't focus can focus perfectly well. They focus for hours on content that makes them feel productive without requiring them to produce anything. They focus intensely on being the most knowledgeable person in the room. They focus on completely on everything except the one thing that would actually change their life. That is not a focus problem. That is a distraction wearing the disguise of self improvement. And it is the most dangerous form of distraction that exists because it feels like progress. It gets praised by people around you and it lets you avoid for years, sometimes for decades. The only question that actually matters: are you executing or are you just consuming? Let me show you what this looks like in real life. You wake up, you run a walk, you read something, you watch a podcast before work, you come home, have dinner, and watch another video. Something that inspiring, something that makes you feel tomorrow will be the day things change. And tomorrow comes, and you do it again. I did this for years, and here's what I know now that I didn't know then. That was not a self improvement routine. That was a consumption addiction wearing the mask of ambition. And your brain is the reason why. Your brain runs on dopamine. Every time you consume something new, a video, a book, a podcast, a scroll, your brain releases dopamine. Not because you have achieved anything, because the information is new. Novelty alone triggers the reward. But here's a part that changes everything. Your brain cannot tell the difference between the dopamine from learning about doing something and the dopamine from actually doing it. You get the same chemical reward for watching someone build a business as you do for building one. This is not a metaphor, this is neuroscience. And it is exactly why the consumption loop feels like progress. Neurologically, for a brief moment, it is. You get the reward without the risk, the feeling of growth, without the exposure of execution. But every time you choose consumption over execution, you are training your brain to expect reward without risk. The content gets easier, the execution gets harder. The gap widens every day until your knowledge has grown for years and your life has not moved at all. That is not laziness. That is your brain doing exactly what you trained it to do. How much of what you consume every day are you actually executing on? I want to talk about what actually happens to your brain when you live in the consumption loop for months, for years. Not what it costs you in productivity, what it costs you in capacity, because those are two completely different things. In 2004, the average human could sustain focused attention on screen for 2.5 minutes before switching tasks. By 2012, that number was 75 seconds. Today, it is 47 seconds, not declined, halved twice. And that research comes not from a tech vlogger or a self help author, but from Dr. Gloria Mark, a professor at the University of California who has spent 2 decades measuring exactly this. But here's a number that should actually concern you: 26.8 minutes. That is how long it takes your brain to fully recover its focus after a single digital interruption. Not 5 minutes, not 10 minutes, 26.8 minutes. Which means if you check your phone 3 times in 2 hours, you have lost almost all of your potential deep focus time. Not because you are distracted for long, because recovery takes longer than the distraction itself. Now, here's where it gets worse. Short form video, TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, does something specific to the brain that regular distraction does not. Researchers at the University of Science and Technology of China found that short form video trains the brain to require constant novelty, a new stimulus every few seconds. And once that pattern is established, the brain becomes genuinely incapable of sustaining attention on anything that doesn't deliver the same stimulation frequency. Reading becomes harder, long form thinking becomes harder, sitting with a difficult problem becomes harder. Not because you are weak, because your brain has been neurologically reprogrammed to demand interruption. And here's the thing about this reprogramming that nobody says clearly enough. It does not feel like damage. It feels completely normal because everyone around you is experiencing the same thing. Your colleagues, your friends, the people you grew up with. The collapse is collective, which makes it invisible. A 2023 study found that the mere physical presence of a smartphone on your desk reduces your cognitive capacity, even when the phone is face down, on silent, not being touched. Your brain knows it's there, and part of it is always waiting for it. The partial waiting, that split attention, cost you every single time. And here's what all of this compounds into over time. The person who spends years in the consumption loop doesn't just lose productivity, they lose the ability to think deeply. They lose the ability to sit with difficulty long enough for genuine insight to emerge. They lose what researchers call the incubation period, the minimum 25 minutes of uninterrupted focus required for the brain to move from surface level processing into genuine creative and analytical depth. Below 25 minutes of sustained focus, that cognitive process cannot occur. Which means if you have never in recent memory sat with one thing for 25 uninterrupted minutes, you have not thought deeply in a very long time. Not because you are not intelligent, because you have never given your brain the conditions it needs to show you what it can actually do. That is what the consumption loop cost you. Not time, cognitive depth. And the longer it continues, the harder the rebuild becomes. Not impossible, but harder every single day. When was the last time you sat with one thing, no phone, no music, no background noise, for 25 uninterrupted minutes? So here's the question you should be asking right now. If the brain has been reprogrammed, can it be reprogrammed back? The answer is yes. And I want to be specific about what that means because the answer is not a morning routine. It is not a productivity app. It's not a 30-day challenge. It's neuroscience applied deliberately every single day. The brain changes in response to what you repeatedly demand from it. That is not a motivational language. That is neuroplasticity, one of the most well-documented findings in modern neuroscience. Which means the consumption loop that broke your focus can be reversed by the same mechanism that built it. Repetition, demand, deliberate discomfort. Here is exactly how. Step 1. The 25-minute rule. The minimum effective dose of focus attention is 25 minutes. Not because 25 minutes is a magic number, because below 25 minutes of uninterrupted focus, the brain never reaches what researchers call the incubation state. The cognitive depth where genuine insight, creativity, and complex problem solving actually occurs. Surface level processing happens in the first few minutes of focus. Real thinking, the kind that produces breakthroughs, solutions, and original ideas, only begins after 25 minutes of sustained, uninterrupted attention. Most people never get there. Not because they lack intelligence, because they interrupt themselves before the brain has time to go deep. Here's the only instruction for this step. Pick one thing you need to execute on. Get a timer for 25 minutes. Put your phone in a different room, not face down on the desk, a different room. Close every tab that is not directly related to the task. And do not stop until the time ends. No music, no background podcasts, no notifications. Just you and the one thing. When your brain tells you to check something, and it will, within the first 5 minutes, you do not negotiate with it. You notice the urge and you return. That noticing and returning is not a failure. That noticing and returning is the training. Every time you bring your attention back, you are rebuilding the neural path of sustained focus. One return at a time. Start with one 25-minute block per day. Just one. This is the entire step. Step 2. Replace one consumption session with execution. You are not going to stop consuming content overnight. I'm not going to tell you to do a dopamine detox or delete your apps. That is not how behavior works. And it is not sustainable. Here's what works. Pick one specific consumption habit you have every day and replace it just once with execution. The morning podcast before work. Replace it with 25 minutes of working on the thing you keep saying you will start. The evening video before bed. Replace it with writing, building, creating, or planning the thing you have been consuming about for months. Not all your consumption. One session, one replacement daily. This was the single most difficult change I made. Not because it required the most effort, because it removed the daily reward I had been giving myself for years. And here's what I need you to understand about those early stages. They are supposed to feel unrewarding at first. That feeling is not a signal that you are doing the wrong thing. It is a signal that you are finally doing the real thing. The discomfort is the evidence that the execution is genuine. Consumption always feels good immediately. Execution rarely does. That gap between how consumption feels and how execution feels in the beginning is the exact gap that keeps most people in the loop forever. You close it by showing up anyway. One replay session at a time. Step 3. 10 minutes outside every day. Without your phone, this is the step that is going to sound the least impressive. And it is the one most backed by hard science. Researchers at the University of California found that natural environments engage what they call soft fascination, gentle, involuntary attention triggered by things like moving leaves, flowing water, open sky. This soft fascination does something that nothing else does as efficiently. It allows your directed attention, the cognitive resource you use for sustained focus, to rest and recover. Not metaphorically, measurably. In brain scans, multiple studies confirm that cognitive recovery from nature exposure begins in as little as 40 seconds of viewing greenery. 40 seconds. You do not need a forest. You do not need a park. You need a window, a plant, or a 10-minute walk outside without your phone. Here's the specific instructions. Every day, ideally before your 25-minute focus block, spend 10 minutes outside. No phone, no podcast, no music. Just walking or sitting in whatever natural environment is available to you. You're not clearing your mind. You're not meditating. You're not trying to think about anything specific. You are simply allowing your directed attention to recover before you demand it to perform. Think of it as warming up before a workout. You would not run a race without warming up your legs. You should not attempt deep focus without restoring the cognitive resource that makes it possible. 10 minutes outside, no phone every day, that is the step. Step 4. Do one thing every day that you don't want to do. This is the step nobody talks about, and it is the one that changes everything else. In 2023, neuroscientists identified the specific brain region responsible for willpower, the ability to do hard things you want to avoid. It is called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And they found something that should fundamentally change how you think about discipline. This region of your brain physically grows when you do things you don't want to do. Not when you succeed, not when you hit a goal, not when you feel motivated. When you do specific things you are about to avoid. Every morning, when you wanted to stay in bed and went for a run anyway, your AMCC grew. Every time you sat down to work when you wanted to scroll, your AMCC grew. Every time you pushed through the first 10 minutes of discomfort instead of reaching for the phone, your AMCC grew. And here's what growing that region does. It builds your capacity to do every other hard thing. Focus, execution, consistency, discipline. Every cognitive function you associated with high performance runs through this region. You cannot think your way to discipline. You cannot consume your way to it. You cannot watch enough videos about it. You can only build it by doing the thing you don't want to do, repeatedly, deliberately, without waiting to feel ready. This is why 6 years of consuming knowledge about discipline never made me disciplined. I was learning about the AMCC without ever training it. Here's the step. Every single day, identify one thing you have been avoiding. One specific thing. Not the hardest thing in your life. Just one thing that creates resistance when you think about doing it. And do it first. Before the consumption, before the phone, before the anything that feels easy. Do the hard things first. Not because it will always go well, not because you will always feel better afterward, because every time you do it, your brain physically changes. And the person who does hard things every day becomes someone who can do hard things. That is not inspiration, that is neuroscience. What is the one thing you have been avoiding every single day that you already know would change everything if you just started doing it? I want to be honest with you about something before I finish. Everything I just gave you, the 25-minute rule, the replacement habit, the 10 minutes outside, the hard things first, you already know you're not going to do all 4 of them tomorrow. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Because the problem was never information. You have had enough information for years. The only problem is the gap between knowing and doing. And that gap is not closed by another video. It is not closed by saving this to your watched later list. It is not closed by sharing it with someone who else needs to hear it. It is closed by one decision, made today, not tomorrow, not Monday, not when things settle down, today. Here's what I know about the consumption loop from living inside it for years. Every day you stay in it, the exit gets harder to find. Not because the steps becomes more difficult, because you become more comfortable with the distance between who you are and who you know you could be. That distance stops feeling like a gap. It starts feeling like a personality. I'm just someone who needs to learn more before I start. I'm just someone who isn't ready yet. I'm just someone who works better when the timing is right. And one day, without any single dramatic moment you can point to, those sentences stop being excuses. They become your identity. I spent 6 years becoming very knowledgeable about a life I was never living. I knew everything about execution. I executed nothing. And the most expensive thing about those 6 years wasn't the time I lost. It was the watching myself become someone who was genuinely comfortable with that. Someone who had found a way to feel like progress without making any. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you this because I sat exactly where you are sitting right now. Watching, consuming, nodding along. Feeling like the time, this video, was the one that would finally change things. And then closing the tab. So I'm going to ask you to do something different today. Not all 4 steps. 1. Pick the one step from the video that created the most resistance when you heard it. Not the easiest one. The one that made something in you quietly saying, I don't want to do that. That resistance is not a coincidence. That is your brain telling you exactly where your AMCC needs to grow. Do that one thing today. Not perfectly, not for long, just once. Because the person who does the hard things once, even badly, even briefly, is already a different person from the one who watched a video about it and moved on. I'm Jitinder. I spent years consuming instead of executing. This channel exists because I finally chose differently. Now it's your turn.